It's a little after 3, so we're going to go ahead and get going. So welcome, thank you for everybody coming. Thank you for coming to Thinking Out of the Box Gets More in the Box. My name is Tim Ring. I'm the engineering manager here at MMA Design. Is that another person join? So a quick overview for today's presentation. We'll start off by providing some brief but salient comments about MMA Design. I will then profile 2 early, what I call springboard SIBR programs at MMA, our Dragnet deorbit system and our Hawk solar array, both of which drove early innovation and growth in some key areas that have impacted our deployable solutions, including those for CubeSats. We'll follow that then by some succinct discussions will be provided by myself and some of my colleagues here on some of our past and ongoing CubeSat programs, including Marco, which I will present, Falcon Set 7, which Trey Quiller will present, Tdagger, which Colin Peter will present, and our Trust Booms, which Susan Tower will present. Finally, I'll wrap everything up by identifying some innovations to CubeSat form factors, applicable to CubeSat form factors rather, which we have been working on or are currently working on here at MMA. Next slide. So MMA, we've been in business for almost 15 years and are located near Boulder, Colorado. Started in 2007. We were founded on the principle of being passionate and creative in space, specifically being disruptive in space with innovative space deployables. So as mentioned earlier, one of our initial springboard SIBR programs was our Dragnet deorbit system, which deployed successfully on orbit and brought down a Minotaur 1 upper stage. It is a deployable passive deorbit system and is described in the following short.
Orbital debris right now is a growing concern for everybody. What goes up must come down. And we have a design that is scalable for all size spacecraft, whether it's large or CubeSat. So we can bring down any spacecraft with this technology.
The Dragnet hardware is launched with the spacecraft. At the end of life, it is deployed from basically the size of a shoebox up to a 14 square meter area. The functionality of Dragnet is to deorbit the spacecraft. In other words, bring it back down to Earth at a faster time period than it normally would through the natural deceleration on orbit. Normally that process could take 25 years or more. With Dragnet, we can reduce that to less than 2 years, usually a 10 to 40 times reduction in order to reduce the amount of space debris that we have on orbit to make spaceflight easier and safer for both Air Force missions and manned spaceflight. The need for the technology really comes out of the number of objects that we currently have on orbit. It's upwards of 11,000 objects that we have to track. Space is becoming more congested, and we need to remove as much debris as possible so that we can keep space safe for those who want to use it. The work with MMA was primarily through the SBIR program, which we used extensively in order to accelerate the transition of hardware to Air Force systems and to the warfighter.
The coolest thing that we get to play with innovation. You know, we get to create and be part of something that's bigger than most people realize. I mean, space is huge, and it's an exciting place to be right now. They're launching hundreds of CubeSats at a time, and that's a concern. So we really need to put our attention on this, and we feel like, you know, we have got a solution, and it's all benefited from Air Force SBIR.
In the case of Dragnet, some key features applicable to CubeSat technologies are the pantograph booms, shown there. These will be exhibited on Falcon Set 7, which Trey will be discussing. Thin film membranes, we have 4 of them on Dragnet. They're exhibited on Falcon Set 7 and Tdagger, and those both will be profiled here shortly. And then, of course, composite tape springs, which are not shown in here. They're kind of hidden underneath the picture here, but or slit tubes, if you will. These are exhibited on both Tdagger and on the Trust Booms. The second notable springboard silver program at MMA was our Hawk solar array, which deployed successfully for the Spark mission, amongst others. It is a deployable CubeSat solar array and is described in the following short film.
We knew that CubeSats were going to be a big thing in the coming years, and so we wanted to be able to provide them as much power as possible without taking up a lot of volume in their spacecraft. So that was what triggered us to come up with the design of high watts per kilogram Hawk. MMA's whole point for this innovation was to give small CubeSats a lot of power without taking up a lot of bus. We created these thin solar array panels that fit just on the outside of the bus, and that way gimbal, which articulates the arrays, at the end of the mission, it can just be placed in a certain position and deorbit the spacecraft as well as provide power during the mission.
Benefit of the SBIR program and our interaction with MMA as to develop a new solar array concept that gives us more power for CubeSats so that we can put more payload and more capability on orbit for the warfighter. The Hawk array has been sold and used by the Air Force. This last summer, we flew a small sat mission that was launched on a commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. The CubeSat was launched from the space station, and it did function. We got all the data that we required from that mission. There is also another mission that NASA is working on in order to actually send the Hawk array for a Mars mission. Working with MMA on the EHawk and Hawk program has been fantastic. They've been an exceptional small business to work with. The innovation that they come up with has been instrumental to the Air Force achieving its goals in the small sat sector and CubeSats in general.
We recently received the Small Business Association SBA Tibbetts Award. It is the award that's given to companies that have been successful in taking SBIR's new transition to commercialization. And we have done that with several of our technologies and have been extremely successful.
So in the case of Hawk, key features applicable to CubeSat technologies are thin composite substrates and a low-profile launcher strength frame, which are both exhibited on Marco, and our thermal knife release system, which is exhibited on Falcon Set 7. Slide. So I want to get into the first mission that we're going to profile today, or first product, is Marco, or Mars Cube 1. Mars successfully deployed in 2018. It acted as a communication relay for the InSight mission and is described in the following short film.
In March of 2016, NASA will be launching the next Mars lander, InSight, from Vandenberg Air Force Base. InSight is a mission that would investigate the planet's interior to understand Mars's evolution. On board this rocket, 2 small spacecraft will be hitching a ride, the Marco spacecraft. Each of these Marco spacecraft will ride along in the rocket carrying InSight. InSight will separate, and soon after, each of the Marco spacecraft will also separate from the rocket. First, Marco A will separate. The rocket will turn 180 degrees, and Marco B will separate as well. Each of the spacecraft will then unfurl their solar wings, their high-gain antenna, and UHF antenna in preparation for a 6.5-month cruise to Mars. When InSight gets to Mars, it will be going through the entry, descent, and landing sequence, and each of the Marco spacecraft will be there to witness this landing on Mars. The Marco spacecraft will be relaying data back from the InSight lander to NASA's Deep Space Network. These spacecraft, the size of a briefcase, will be the first interplanetary CubeSats, paving the way for future small spacecraft exploration and assisting and reducing risk to future landers and flybys.
For Marco, MMA designed, fabricated, and delivered the solar array wings for both of the Marco spacecraft. You can see here, one of them is stowed one of them's deployed. The stove one's kind of hard to see with this advantage point, but the design heavily leveraged our Hawk solar arrays. And specifically, it leveraged the efficient stowage in the CubeSat form factor and the high watts per kilogram performance. Don't forget.
Okay.
Okay, so although much of the technology from Marco was realized on Hawk, there were some new challenges. The most notable challenge was the orientation of the deployed solar array with respect to the spacecraft. Unlike Hawk, the deployed solar array on Marco had to be oriented 90 degrees about an axis perpendicular to the root deployment axis. Consequently, a design of a compact root hinge that could deploy each array wing about 2 orthogonal axes and hold it in place for the mission had to be realized, as the following animation sequence demonstrates. The first articulation, that's the initial axis, and it has to rotate an additional 90 degrees orthogonal to that. Which the other side has to do as well. Certainly, the success of Marco demonstrated the viability of CubeSats on interplanetary missions, and I think we all kind of agree on that. And hopefully, there's a future for CubeSats on interplanetary missions. I don't have a voiceover for this, so I guess we'll just.
It's just very thin
I
substrate.
mean, it does show, you know, the deployed array there, kind of a close up there. We also did the wiring as well. The 7 cell strings we featured on that as well. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Trey Cooler, who's going to be talking about Falcon Set.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, everyone. My name is Trey Quiller, mechanical engineer here at MMA. I'm just going to talk about Falcon Set 7. I was one of the engineers that was doing a lot of the testing on this program. So go to the next slide. Falcon Set 7 is a deployable telescope that fits in a 3U system. So the actual bus is a 3U. And why we want to do this is that so we can get bigger optics in space. Just as an example here, we have the Hubble. You know exactly what size the primary optic of the Hubble is because that's what fit within the space shuttle. But with Falcon Set 7, we have a 10 centimeter cross section that we could have primary optic for a traditional optic. But with our deployable system, we actually have a 20 centimeter primary optic. So if this was able to be scaled up to Hubble size, we can get significantly better resolution for looking at further out into the universe or even back at Earth. And there were a lot of challenges with Falcon Set 7, so we can go to the next slide. And that kind of started with the volume that we were constrained to. So we were constrained to a 1U volume for this system, and then deploying out another 17 inches like I showed in that previous slide. And so you can actually see here on the image on the left, we have our pantograph booms that we deploy out, and then we have a membrane optic in the center. So it's a diffractive optic instead of a refractive optic. It's slightly different technology, but you're still able to get your images. This system was actually working with the Air Force Academy and looking at the sun. So it's an easy target to look at. One of the big challenges with this program is most of our systems, we try to offload them for our deployments, and Falcon Set 7 is such a tight confined space, and it deploys out to such a large volume that we couldn't actually get an offload structure. And then we'll go to the next slide here and just kind of detail a little bit more of the stuff that we've gone through. So we have our thin film membrane, which we use on a lot of the programs at MMA. That's something we've become experts in and are very knowledgeable in how to do that. We have those pantograph booms. So there's 3 of them in this system, and it actually deploys the optic up and then folds it out. And then we have the melt wire and thermal knife, as Tim was talking about earlier. That is what holds our door closed and preloads the system. And then when we activate that, it releases a door to allow for this. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just a video of the deployment of the engineering model of Falcon Set 7 on the Vomit Comet ride. So I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the things that we did with this. as you can watch this video. Like I said earlier, we couldn't offload the system, so what we had to do is we had to come up with a rigorous test campaign to deploy the system upright and upside down to bound the issue that we have in the zero-G environment. Obviously, we also did the vomit comet trip here as well. And when we had our qual unit, we actually did 50 deployments on the qual model. And so we did extensive testing on the system to make sure that we understood what exactly is happening and make sure that we're not going to fail on orbit. And our criteria for success was 5 successful deployments, right side up and upside down without a failure. And from those 50 deployments that we did on that qual model, you can actually see the slow-mo here to see how fast and violent this system actually comes out. From those 50 deployments, we actually were able to implement 6 separate mechanisms. So you can see it kind of flies up, and that piece of FOD is just for stowing at that point in time. And then it folds out, and you can see it starts to tension the membrane. But we had 6 different mechanisms that we had to design to ensure that we weren't going to snag. There's lanyards in there. We have the membrane itself, as well as just minimizing any sorts of failure. We came down to a very consistent packing procedure. And that's just kind of what MMA does. Is MMA, we do the design, the analysis of the systems, but we also test it. So we don't just trust in our analysis, and we do all of our testing as well. So that was Falcon Set 7. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, and I'm going to pass it off to Colin Peter, who's going to talk about Maxwell and Tdagger.
Thanks, Trey. So, as Trey said, I'm Colin Peter. I'm a mechanical engineer here at MMA, and I'll be talking about Tdagger, which stands for Tape Deployable High Gain Reflector Array. I'll start off with a short film here.
The warfighter needs communications. They need data quickly in parts of the world that don't have cell phone towers and where communication is being jammed. Being able to meet their needs in a low-cost manner is really at the heart of what the Tdagger antenna is intended to do.
The Deployable High Gain Reflector Array, or Tdagger, is a deployable antenna that can be used for communications, various imaging type missions that would typically be done with a parabolic type of antenna. Instead, ours is a deployable membrane-based antenna. We deliver much larger aperture for a given volume and mass, and we do that at a lower cost to support the Air Force mission needs.
The need that this Tdagger antenna is addressing is the need for high bandwidth communications between our warfighters. And traditionally that's been done by large satellites, geosynchronous satellites, and they're high in cost, take a long time to acquire and launch. So the Tdagger antenna is providing a much smaller antenna that can be packaged into a much smaller volume so that we can start augmenting these heritage approaches for communications between our warfighters. It's a really exciting opportunity. It takes a lot of money to put satellite hardware in space, and especially the first demonstrations of those hardware components. So
in addition to the applications mentioned for Tdagger in that video, it's also being explored of using Tdagger for deep space applications. Tdagger has a unique opportunity to fly with the CU Maxwell team. It'll be just a flight demonstration mission for Tdagger, and this provides a unique opportunity for us not only to fly our hardware, but to support CU in education, as well as CU for those students to work with industry partners and get some industry experience while still in academia. So some key features pointed out with Tdagger. There's a very compact central mechanism that deploys 8 slit tubes all simultaneously. And that deploys out all of these 5 thin film membranes into a final cast grain antenna. So we're currently working on,
Okay.
so this is our engineering unit, and it shows the deployment of the engineering unit. We've spent a lot of time working on these deployments and making sure everything deployed correctly. So the engineering unit was purely for functional testing, but we're currently working on the flight unit, which will be going through all environments, and as well as functional testing throughout that environmental test regime. So one of the biggest challenges with Tdagger is just fitting all that deployment mechanism in a small 1U volume, which is the stowed volume of Tdagger. So with that, I'll pass it on to Susan Tower to talk about trust booms.
Hello, I'm Susan Tower. I'm a principal engineer here at MMA. Most of my projects right now involve developing our trust booms beyond the conceptual level. The top trust boom there was developed on a phase 1 SIBR. It's a 1U by 1U 1U volume package that then deploys up to 10 meters long. It has 3 carbon or fiberglass long-drawn tapes, and the mechanism and the boom also into that 1U by 1U package. The truss boom shown below, we've taken that concept and moved it to a larger 3 meter by 3 meter antenna, and that is a 4 meter tall boom that fits in a much larger volume, but it shows how we're scaling from CubeSat to our larger antenna programs. Next slide. Our next development with the smaller truss boom is to develop a 1 meter antenna for a NASA program in conjunction with Purdue. And one of the issues with the CubeSats and their size is if you want a large antenna that does low frequency, the antenna can be so large it shadows the solar arrays and other communication devices on the CubeSat. So the idea was to use a truss boom and then some self-deploying side booms using our slip tube technology to move a 1 meter antenna out away from the spacecraft and out of the way of solar arrays and other communication devices. This particular antenna looks both towards the Earth and out towards other devices. It's for a particular program called Snoopy, which is Signals of Opportunity in the P-band investigation mission. Next slide. As part of this development is creating much better, go ahead and start the video, is creating trustworthy finite element models of our truss booms and other structures so that we can scale them up or scale them down in our program. So this video is showing our first deployment of this is a 4 long-drawn truss boom. We were using 1-inch diameter tapes that we already had off the shelf in the lab. So it doesn't fit in a 1U, but we used this prototype, did some testing on it, correlated to an FEM model, and the analysis guys here at MMA are very happy with their models, and they feel they can design future truss booms to meet mission requirements. And I'll pass it back off to Tim to finish this up.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Thank everybody else for profiling these missions. Very exciting. So far we've profiled some of our CubeSat missions and underlying technologies. However, they're always innovating here. Some of these innovations, which I'm highlighting here, are applicable mostly to CubeSats only because of their stowed form factors. They likely could also be used on, probably likely would be used on larger satellites, but nonetheless, they could be used on CubeSats. So I'm going to start off with These are, this is our deployable mirrors. We did 2 of them. Both of them were funded by NASA. One was a study called Planet Finder, and another one was a SIVER. Yeah, the first one was a Planet Finder mirror, like shown in the film. And I'll just wait. And then the second was a precision deployable mirror. This was done on a SIVER, very similar. In both cases, they utilize high-strength composite tape springs to provide both deployment energy and end-of-travel latching. You can see there. Once latched, the structure forms a kinematic mount, which is very important for optics. And it's got a certain, the degrees of freedom are arranged in such a way that the optic can distort in a predictable way under thermal loading. But this structure, even though we're showing it as mirrors here, it could also be realized for other space deployables, such as antennas or even radiators. Slide. Second one I'm going to talk about is the Nanosat Coilable Mast. Now, before you show the film, coilable mast has been around a long time. But the unique thing here is it's at a CubeSat form factor. Usually they're for the really big long booms, and they don't necessarily have scaled down to the CubeSat size. So we did a brief one here. It was only 2 bays. But what's unique here is it does deploy using its own strain energy, and it does, like our truss booms, it does feature continuous longerons. So this is a pretty exciting development that we started working on. We're going to continue. Some applications for this they're not necessarily just limited to spacecraft. Something of this nature could also be used on a rover, depending on the application. But so yeah, having it stowed in such a small form factor makes it very desirable. And then the next one is the solar array drive assembly. This was profiled briefly in one of the introductory films with Hawk. And so we have actually built these and flown a few. We are continuing to evolve them. These are our solar array drive assemblies. This is for one of our larger arrays, our CubeSat arrays. It provides plus or minus 180 degrees of articulation. As you can see on the left there, the design in pancake form factors applicable to either a 1U by 1U footprint or a 2U by 1U footprint, with the latter being somewhat bigger and can handle more power. And the wires egressing the solar arrays are all handled through the SATA. They're not handled externally, which makes it also very desirable. Slide. So, of course, everything we presented here are indeed building blocks for our solutions here, be they CubeSat or not. In some of the pictures here, we can see that we are using them on other programs that are not necessarily CubeSat. Thermal knife there that's shown, that was used for a larger solar array. And that's the one in the top. It says conductors, it's kind of in the center there. Of course, the membranes, we don't have anything to scale there, but that was a very large membrane that we deployed in our lab here. And then our composite tape springs, our tape spring deployers, you can see 2 of them right there. The one on the right, I believe that is one that is being used on Tdagger. Right. And then, so to give you an idea of scale, we've certainly scaled up both the TDA and the tape spring. As you can see there quite a bit. So what we're learning on these technologies for CubeSats is enabling us to do these for all kinds of different programs. And in some cases, we're even working on some terrestrial programs. With that, I think I will open it up to any questions anybody may have.
Any questions in the chat? No? Okay. Okay, so if anybody is interested in joining any of our other live presentations, you can check the CubeSat Developers Workshop virtual exhibit booth /MMA Design The URL is at the top of this slide, and the schedule of the remainder presentations are also here. But you'll find this schedule as well as links to sign up on that page at CubeSat Developer Workshop. And if you're interested in downloading a brochure, there's also a link. You just have to scroll down the page a little bit, and there's a link there to download a PDF of our latest brochure. Thanks everyone for joining. We hope to see you again.